The clinking of crystal glasses echoed through the lavish hotel ballroom in downtown Seattle. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow on the smiling faces of the elegantly dressed guests. For the largest charitable foundation in the Pacific Northwest, this annual gala was a crucial moment to showcase achievements and attract sponsors. Adrian stood by a high-top table in the corner, a glass of whiskey nearly untouched in his hand. As a detective on the verge of retirement, he was no stranger to these social events, but he had never truly felt comfortable at them. His gaze cut through the crowd, settling on a couple dancing in the center of the floor. It was his wife, Lucy, with Stephen, the foundation's top donor, swaying to the rhythm of the jazz band. Stephen's expensive tailor-made suit enhanced his slender figure, while Lucy glowed in her backless evening gown. Adrian noticed that Stephen's hand seemed to rest a little lower than etiquette allowed, and his face was entirely too close. What hurt Adrian the most was the radiant expression on Lucy's face, something he hadn't seen in a long time. 30 years of marriage had made Adrian an expert on his wife. He could see her satisfaction in the slight lift of her chin, her excitement in the way she gently bit her lower lip. In this moment, she was completely immersed in her interaction with Stephen, as if she had forgotten her husband was watching from nearby. It wasn't the first time. Over the last few months, Adrian had noticed Lucy's attitude toward this important foundation. Donor had become increasingly intimate. Initially, he chalked it up to work-related socializing, but tonight, watching them on the dance floor, he realized it went far beyond a professional relationship. Ever since Stephen became the foundation's main sponsor 6 months ago, Lucy had started mentioning his name frequently. "Stephen thinks we should expand the youth program. Stephen was impressed with my proposal. Stephen invited me to a business forum." At first, Adrian was happy his wife was being appreciated, but gradually he noticed subtle changes. Lucy began paying more attention to her appearance, working longer hours, and becoming especially secretive with her phone. Several times when Adrian walked into the room, she would abruptly stop texting and quickly lock the screen. Adrian set his glass down and moved through the crowd toward the dance floor. As he walked, people parted like the sea for Moses, perhaps because of the serious expression on his face or the aura of authority he had developed over years as a detective. "Sorry to interrupt," Adrian said as he reached the center of the floor, his voice calm but firm. "Lucy, I think we should go home." The other couples on the dance floor barely noticed this small incident. The music and conversations continued. But between Adrian, Lucy, and Stephen, time seemed to have stopped. Lucy's smile froze, transforming into an ambiguous expression. Her eyes shone with a light Adrian didn't quite recognize. She glanced quickly at Stephen and then turned to her husband, a flash of irritation in her eyes. "Adrian, don't you think this is a bit inappropriate?" Lucy asked, her voice soft but visibly annoyed. Adrian could sense her reaction wasn't just about the dance being interrupted, but because his appearance threatened a certain atmosphere between her and Stephen. Stephen elegantly released Lucy, taking a half-step back. "Hey, buddy, we're just dancing. It's a party. We're all just relaxing." He wore that confident smile, typical of successful men, as if nothing in this world could truly threaten him. Adrian noticed a flicker of challenge in Stephen's eyes, that look of, "I can get whatever I want." As an experienced detective, he had seen many men like that, accustomed to controlling situations and getting what they desire, whether in business or with other men's wives. "I'm not talking to you," Adrian said without even looking at Stephen, keeping his gaze fixed on Lucy. "Lucy, we need to talk. Now." People began to notice the tense atmosphere, and the conversations around them started to fade. Lucy glanced around quickly, realizing she was becoming the center of attention. She took Adrian's arm, trying to pull him away. "What are you doing?" she asked in a low voice. "You're embarrassing me." "I'm embarrassing you?" Adrian replied in disbelief. "For the last half hour I've been standing in the corner watching my wife flirt with another man, and you haven't even looked at me once." "We were just dancing, Adrian," Lucy said with irritation. "It's part of professional networking. Stephen is one of our foundation's biggest donors. I have a responsibility to make sure he's having a good time." Adrian took a deep breath, trying to control his emotions. "And what about me? I came here to support you, but since we arrived, you've pushed me aside. This isn't the first time, Lucy." Adrian remembered the last few social events where Lucy had shown the same distance. At a charity dinner a month ago, he spent almost the entire evening alone while Lucy remained inseparable from Stephen. When he questioned it later, she dismissed it as a work necessity. Lucy's eyes showed a flash of guilt, quickly replaced by irritation. She looked around, noticing that more and more people were discreetly watching them. Stephen was also nearby, pretending to chat with someone but clearly paying attention. Adrian could see that Lucy was weighing how to handle this awkward situation, whether to comply with her husband's request to leave or maintain her image in front of Stephen and her colleagues. "Listen," Lucy's voice turned cold, her eyes shining with a determination Adrian had never seen before. "I'll dance with whomever I please. You have two options: stand here and watch, or get out." These words were like a dagger, straight to Adrian's heart. In 30 years, he had never heard his wife speak to him in that tone. He felt a wave of dizziness, as if the entire ballroom was spinning. In that moment, he saw a completely unfamiliar Lucy, not the kind, considerate woman he had married, but a stranger, twisted by power and ambition. The murmurs around them grew louder. Adrian noticed some people were even taking out their phones, possibly recording the scene. As an experienced detective, he knew all too well the consequences of losing control in public. "Fine, as you wish," Adrian said calmly, turning to leave. He didn't see the hesitation that crossed Lucy's face, nor did he hear her softly say his name after he had walked a few steps away. The sound was too low, drowned out by the noise of the room. She wanted to follow him, but Stephen's hand had already rested on her shoulder, applying a light pressure to keep her in place. "Don't worry, he'll cool down," Stephen whispered in her ear. "Emotional outbursts are common at these things. Shall we have another dance?" Lucy hesitated for a moment, turning her head toward Stephen. His smile was full of charm, his eyes shining with something that fascinated her: power, success, and appreciation for her skills. Unlike Adrian, Stephen never treated her like a wife who needed protection, but as a talented professional. This kind of recognition was something she found increasingly hard to get in her marriage in recent years. "Yeah." "Yes, one more dance," she finally agreed, temporarily suppressing the unease in her heart. The cold air hit his face as Adrian stood outside the hotel, taking a deep breath. On this November night, the city lights blurred before his eyes. He took out his phone and called an Uber. During the few minutes he waited, his mind went blank. It wasn't until he was sitting in the car that he felt a delayed surge of anger and confusion. 30 years of marriage. They had weathered countless storms together. What had changed in Lucy? More importantly, was tonight a momentary outburst or a symptom of a deeper problem? Adrian replayed their marriage in his mind. He had never been the kind of husband completely consumed by his job. Even during his busiest cases, he always made sure to attend Lucy's important events and support her career development. Together, they raised 2 children who now lived independently, sharing the ups and downs of life. As a detective, his work certainly took up a lot of time, but he never let it come before his family. In the last 2 years, as retirement neared, Adrian had deliberately cut back on his overtime, hoping to spend more time with Lucy. He planned to take her to Europe after he retired, fulfilling a dream they had when they were young. However, just as he was trying to grow closer, Lucy seemed to be gradually pulling away. As an experienced detective, Adrian knew that intuition is usually right. And right now, his intuition was screaming. His marriage was in crisis. It wasn't just tonight's conflict, but also Lucy's unusual behavior over the past few months: frequent late nights, unexplained overtime, an overprotective attitude toward her phone, and constant mentions of Stephen. Adrian decided it was time to use his professional skills to uncover the truth, not for revenge, but for the truth itself. He needed to know exactly what was wrong with his marriage. Lucy stood frozen, watching Adrian's figure disappear through the ballroom doors. A wave of complex emotions washed over her. What she had said was too much, she knew it. It didn't reflect her true thoughts, just an impulsive, defensive reaction. What troubled her most was that she had said such words for a man who was not her husband. "Is everything all right?" At some point, Stephen had returned to her side, his hand resting lightly on her back. Lucy instinctively took a step forward, moving away from his touch. I think I need to get some air, she said, forcing a smile before quickly heading to the restroom. Once the stall door was closed, Lucy leaned against it, finally free from maintaining her perfect social mask. She took out her phone and dialed Adrian's number, but the call went straight to voicemail. She sighed, putting the phone down without leaving a message. What could she say? Apologize? Explain? It seemed no words could repair the damage she had just caused. The woman in the mirror looked elegant and radiant, but only she knew the weariness and confusion inside. At 52, in the eyes of most, she was a model of success, a project director for a major charity, a respected community leader. But in recent months she felt an increasingly inexplicable emptiness. Her life with Adrian had fallen into a comfortable but monotonous routine. Adrian was a good husband, hard-working and reliable, but with age, the communication between them seemed to dwindle. Adrian was about to retire while she was at the peak of her career. Their worlds were gradually drifting apart. Stephen's appearance shattered this calm. Since he became the foundation's main donor 6 months ago, Lucy's life had subtly changed. He wasn't just a wealthy donor, but a man full of charisma, intelligent, confident, successful, and he showed genuine appreciation for her professional skills. At first, everything was purely professional. Stephen would make suggestions for the foundation's projects. Lucy would implement them. They would chat at meetings, occasionally sharing working lunches. But over time, the lines began to blur. Working lunches turned into private dinners, professional discussions into personal exchanges. Stephen asked about her dreams and aspirations, listening sincerely to her ideas, something she experienced less and less in her relationship with Adrian. 3 months ago, after discussing project details, they had a few glasses of red wine. When Stephen leaned in to kiss her, Lucy knew she should have pushed him away, but she didn't. In that moment, she felt understood, appreciated, valued as a woman, and not just as a wife. In the days that followed, their relationship deepened quickly. Despite being filled with guilt, Lucy couldn't stop herself. Stephen gave her what she had gradually lost in her marriage: passion, recognition, and a sense of newness. The sound of her phone interrupted her thoughts. It was Stephen. "Are you okay? Everyone's asking where you are." Stephen's voice was full of concern, but Lucy could detect a hint of impatience. "I'm fine. I just need some time to clear my head," Lucy replied. "Look, if you need to talk, I'm here. Adrian's reaction was a bit over the top. You shouldn't feel bad about it." Lucy frowned. Was Adrian's reaction over the top, or was her own behavior excessive? "Thanks, but I think I should go home. Could you make my excuses to the director? Tell him I'm not feeling well." "Of course, no problem. Do you want me to give you a ride?" Stephen's tone held a certain insinuation. "No thanks, I can manage on my own," Lucy replied firmly. Tonight she needed to be alone. She needed to think about what she really wanted. After hanging up, Lucy took a deep breath, fixed her makeup, and left the restroom. She avoided the crowd and slipped out a side door. On one hand, she was worried about Adrian. On the other, she didn't want to face more questions and innuendos from Stephen. On the way home, Lucy tried to contact Adrian again, but she still couldn't get through. She began to feel anxious. Adrian rarely ignored her calls even after an argument. The house was completely dark. Lucy turned on the lights and found the living room empty. She went upstairs to check the bedroom, but didn't find Adrian there either. In the master closet, Adrian's travel suitcase was gone, as were some of his everyday clothes. Lucy felt a surge of fear. Adrian had left, and it didn't seem like he was coming back soon. She dialed Adrian's number again, this time leaving a message. "Adrian, I'm so sorry. I was way out of line. Please call me back, okay? We need to talk." Hanging up, Lucy sat on the edge of the bed, feeling an unprecedented loneliness. She knew that after tonight, their marriage would never be the same. But she still hoped they could fix things. After all, 30 years of marriage shouldn't end over a moment of stupidity. As for her relationship with Stephen, that was a mistake, one she was now beginning to regret. Meanwhile, Adrian checked into a discreet downtown hotel. Sitting on the edge of the bed, he looked at the missed calls and the voicemail from Lucy on his phone, but had no intention of calling back. He needed time to think, space to sort through these confusing emotions. It wasn't that he didn't love Lucy. On the contrary, it was precisely because he loved her so deeply that what happened tonight was so painful. As a husband, he was willing to give his wife space and freedom, but as a man, he couldn't tolerate being so openly ignored and insulted. As a detective, Adrian was used to suspicion and investigation. Now, these professional instincts were telling him that tonight's incident might just be the tip of the iceberg. He recalled Lucy's unusual behavior over the past few months: frequent overtime, extreme caution with her phone, significant emotional fluctuations. Before, he attributed this to work stress, but now he had to consider another possibility. Adrian opened his laptop and logged into their shared family cloud storage account. He didn't hack Lucy's devices or invade her privacy. That would be illegal and against his professional ethics. But the family's shared accounts were common property. He had a right to access them. The shared calendar showed Lucy had multiple work dinners and foundation meetings, but the schedules didn't match what she had told him. On several occasions, the location-sharing feature showed her at upscale restaurants or hotels, not the places she had claimed to be. Adrian rubbed his temples. All these signs pointed to a possibility he didn't want to face. Lucy might be cheating on him, not just about tonight, but about her entire relationship with Stephen. But without conclusive proof, he didn't want to jump to conclusions. As a detective, he knew that hypotheses need factual support, not the other way around. Adrian decided to seek help from a trusted friend. He called Ray, his longtime partner and close friend, now retired. "Hey man, can I crash at your place for a few days?" Adrian asked directly. "Of course, you're welcome anytime. What happened?" Ray's voice was full of concern. "I need some space to think things through. I'll tell you the details when I get there." "All right, you know the address. The key's in the usual spot." After hanging up, Adrian began to plan his next steps. He needed more information, but he had to obtain it legally and ethically. Tomorrow, he would contact some trusted colleagues for professional advice. While Adrian was packing his things to head to Ray's house, Stephen was at the party, chatting with a potential business partner. He had a gracious smile on his face, as if the small incident earlier had never happened. To him, this was just a minor ripple in a sea of social occasions, soon to be forgotten. Stephen enjoyed a great reputation in business and charitable circles, a successful entrepreneur, a generous donor, an elegant gentleman. But beneath this polished exterior hid a calculating man. For him, charity was merely a tool to enhance his public image, and Lucy was a means to gain internal influence at the foundation. He was certainly attracted to Lucy. She was intelligent, professional, and ambitious. But more importantly, she had decision-making power over the foundation's projects, which could conveniently provide perfect public relations material for his company. His company was facing controversies over environmental and labor rights issues, and a close association with a charitable foundation was the best way to counteract these negative influences. As for Lucy herself, Stephen enjoyed their relationship, but he never had any long-term plans. He was used to this game: attract, conquer, enjoy, and then pull back before things got complicated. Adrian's appearance tonight was just a small inconvenience, one that would soon be resolved. Stephen glanced at his watch, deciding it was time to find an excuse to leave. The party had already served its purpose. He had showcased his generosity and influence and established several valuable business contacts. As for Lucy's marital problems, that was not his main concern. In the quiet of the night, 3 people lay awake with different thoughts. Lucy tossed and turned in an empty house, thinking about how to save her marriage and reevaluate her relationship with Stephen. Adrian was coolly analyzing the situation in Ray's guest room, determined to find the truth. And Stephen slept soundly in his luxurious apartment, planning how to maximize the value of this relationship while ensuring he didn't get into trouble. The cracks in the marriage were spreading in the darkness, while the truth waited to surface. In the following days, communication between Adrian and Lucy became cold and limited. Adrian returned home to pick up more clothes, but refused a long conversation, simply stating he needed space to think. Lucy tried to apologize and explain, but Adrian's attitude made her realize this crisis was far more serious than she had imagined. "Adrian, I know I hurt you, and I'm truly sorry," Lucy said, standing in the bedroom doorway as Adrian packed. "What's the point of apologizing now?" Adrian replied quietly. If I hadn't interrupted, would you have cared how I felt? Lucy opened her mouth but had no response, because she knew that on that night, absorbed in Stephen's attention, she really had forgotten to consider her husband's feelings. Even worse, after Adrian left, she had even agreed to another dance with Stephen, a detail she would never tell Adrian. "Can we talk? Really talk?" Lucy asked tentatively. Adrian stopped what he was doing, silent for a moment. "Not now, Lucy. I need time." Adrian was temporarily staying at his old friend Ray's house. Ray was a retired police captain, also his partner and confidant for years. Following Ray's advice, Adrian decided to gather more information instead of making rash decisions. "Are you sure you want to go down this road?" Ray asked, sitting on a lounge chair in the backyard, sipping a beer. "There are some things that, once you know them, you can't pretend you don't." Adrian looked at the sunset in the distance and nodded. 30 years, Ray. I need the truth, no matter how painful it is." Ray understood Adrian's character, rational, steadfast, and with a strong sense of justice. As his partner for years, he had witnessed Adrian solve complex cases with meticulous investigation and sharp intuition. Now, Adrian was applying these skills to investigate his own marriage, a painful but understandable course of action. "All right, I know a private investigator, very professional and completely legal. I can introduce you." The next day, Adrian met William, a former FBI agent turned private investigator. After hearing the situation, William proposed a legal and efficient investigation plan. "We will not invade anyone's privacy or break any laws," William emphasized. "We will only collect information that is already in the public domain or that you have a right to access, such as surveillance cameras, photos in public places, etc." Adrian nodded, understanding. As a detective, he knew the importance of legal boundaries well. Even in the pursuit of truth, he would not cross the line. Meanwhile, Lucy was trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy, but she was filled with anxiety and guilt. Adrian's departure forced her to re-examine her behavior and choices. She began to realize she had been blinded by Stephen's attention and praise, forgetting what was truly important, 30 years of love and trust with Adrian. However, when she tried to distance herself from Stephen, she found it was much harder than she had imagined. As the Foundation's main donor, Stephen found reasons to contact her almost daily, and although she didn't want to admit it, she was still drawn to his charm and attention. "I heard Adrian has moved out temporarily," Stephen asked casually after a project meeting. Lucy gave him a wary look. "It's just temporary. We need some space." Stephen nodded, showing sympathy. "I understand. If you need any help, you can count on me." His tone was gentle, but Lucy keenly perceived a flash of satisfaction in his eyes. This subtle expression unsettled Lucy. She began to doubt whether Stephen truly cared about her or just saw her as a conquest. Were all those compliments and understanding sincere or carefully designed manipulations? A week later, William brought the results of the investigation. The photos showed Lucy and Stephen meeting several times outside of work hours, in places that included upscale restaurants, hotel lobbies, and parks. Some photos captured them in intimate conversations, with Stephen's hand on Lucy's or around her waist. The most crucial piece was a legally obtained surveillance video from a hotel lobby, showing them getting into an elevator together and leaving separately 2 hours later. Adrian reviewed this evidence in silence, his heart shattered but showing no emotion. He had always hoped his suspicions were wrong, but reality cruelly confirmed his worst fears. "This was all obtained through legal channels?" Adrian asked, his voice disturbingly calm. "Completely legal," William confirmed. "We only collected information from public places without invading anyone's privacy." Adrian nodded. As a detective, he knew the importance of evidence and the limits of legal evidence collection. "Thank you, William. You've done a good job." "What are you going to do?" William asked. "I need to hear the truth directly from her." Adrian's voice was firm and calm. That night, Adrian returned home. Lucy was in the kitchen preparing dinner, and her face lit up with surprise when she saw him walk in. "Adrian, you're back." She quickly approached him, wanting to hug him, but stopped when she saw his expression. Adrian placed the evidence on the dining table. "I need you to explain this." Lucy looked at the photos in the report, gradually turning pale. She opened her mouth as if wanting to defend herself, but ultimately just sat down in silence. These photos clearly showed her betrayal, with no room for excuses. "How long has this been going on?" Adrian asked, his voice surprisingly calm. Lucy's fingers intertwined tightly. 3 months, she replied softly, realizing it was the first time she had admitted her infidelity in a conversation. Why? This question almost got stuck in Adrian's throat. Lucy took a deep breath, looking at her husband. All the prepared excuses and explanations seemed futile at this moment. She decided to tell the truth, even if it would hurt Adrian. At first, it was just a working relationship. Then, he made me feel valued, appreciated, not just as a wife, but as a talented, ambitious professional. And I didn't? Adrian's voice was filled with pain. No, that's not it, Lucy hurried to explain. The problem between us isn't that you're not good enough, but that we gradually became different people. You're about to retire, while my career is at a crucial moment. I feel the distance between us growing wider and wider. So you chose betrayal over communication? Adrian asked bitterly. Are 30 years of marriage worth nothing? I made a mistake, Adrian. A terrible mistake. Lucy's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't break down. She didn't beg for forgiveness. She knew her actions were likely beyond forgiveness. I will end everything with Stephen, she continued, with determination in her voice, not to save our marriage, but because I realized it was a mistake. This relationship was based on falsehood and betrayal from the beginning. Adrian looked at this woman he had shared half his life with, his feelings mixed. He had loved her deeply, but now the foundation of trust had collapsed. Although her sincerity and regret seemed genuine, some damages cannot be repaired. No, Lucy, some things once broken can't be fixed, Adrian said serenely. I want a divorce. Although she had mentally prepared herself, Lucy was still shocked by these words. Adrian, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, but please give us a chance, 30 years together. It's precisely because of those 30 years that I can't accept betrayal, Adrian interrupted, determination in his eyes. We shared most of our lives, Lucy. I thought we knew each other well enough, respected each other enough to at least face problems with honesty. But you chose deceit and betrayal. It wasn't a momentary impulse, but continuous lies for 3 months. Every overtime, every late return, every lie was a desecration of our marriage. Lucy couldn't answer. She could only lower her head and sob quietly. She knew Adrian was right. This wasn't a mistake that could be erased with an apology, but a series of deliberate choices that ultimately led to irreversible consequences. I've already contacted a lawyer, Adrian continued, his voice regaining its professional coolness. I hope this process will be civilized and swift. We don't have minor children, and the assets can be divided equally. I won't make things difficult for you, but please, don't make them difficult for me either. With that, Adrian went to the bedroom and began to pack more of his personal belongings. Lucy followed him, wanting to continue explaining, but Adrian's firm attitude made her understand that at this moment, any words would be useless. That night, Adrian left the home where they had lived together for 30 years again. This time, he knew he wouldn't be back. In the car, he finally allowed himself to release the emotions he had suppressed all night, with silent tears rolling down his face. But along with the sadness, there was also a strange sense of liberation. At least, now he knew the truth. He was no longer in the dark. Lucy, alone in the empty house, finally broke down into heart-wrenching sobs. She cried not only for losing her marriage, but for her own stupidity and weakness. She picked up her phone, wanting to contact Stephen for comfort, but ultimately put it down. It was Stephen who seduced her, but in the end, she made the choice herself. Now she had to face the consequences of those choices alone. With the night growing deep, each of them reflected on the future in different places. Adrian was determined to rebuild his life, decisively cutting ties with the past, while Lucy began to face a future without Adrian and a deep reflection on her own actions. For this marriage, the fragments of trust could no longer be pieced together. The divorce process began more quickly and decisively than she had anticipated. Adrian hired an experienced divorce lawyer, and Lucy, following a friend's advice, also sought legal representation. Although the process was civilized, every meeting at the lawyer's office was filled with pain and awkwardness. Adrian maintained a professional calm, while Lucy struggled to control her emotions, accepting the reality that their marriage was ending. Meanwhile, Lucy tried to end her relationship with Stephen, but found it was much harder than she had imagined. On one hand, as the foundation's main donor, Stephen played an important role in her work. On the other hand, she found that she was still attracted to his charm and power, even though she had already recognized the danger of this attraction. "We need to talk," Lucy said, pulling Stephen aside after a project meeting. "Of course, my dear. What about?" Stephen's smile was still charming, but Lucy was beginning to see through his calculations. "About us. This relationship needs to end, Stephen. Adrian has filed for divorce. My marriage is ruined." Stephen's smile tightened slightly, but he soon regained his confidence. "I'm sorry to hear that, but since that's the case, you're free now, aren't you?" Lucy shook her head. "It's not like that. I need time to sort out my thoughts, reevaluate my life. All of this has happened too fast." Stephen frowned, but then nodded understandingly. "Of course, I respect your decision. But remember, if you need any support, I'm always here." On the surface, Stephen accepted Lucy's decision, but his eyes revealed a different message. He had no intention of letting her go easily. For him, the relationship with the Foundation's project director had strategic significance, especially as he sought to improve his company's image through charitable activities. Meanwhile, Adrian began to rebuild his life with Ray's support. He rented a small apartment, focused on his work, and started planning his post-retirement life. Although he still felt pain, he was determined not to let this betrayal define the rest of his life. "Are you okay?" Ray asked one evening, as they both drank beer in Adrian's new apartment. "Better," Adrian replied, though his eyes still held a certain shadow. "Knowing the truth is always better than living a lie." Ray nodded, but still looked worriedly at his friend. "Have you thought about getting revenge? I mean, on that Stephen guy who used your wife and destroyed your marriage." Adrian was silent for a moment, then shook his head. "Revenge solves nothing. It would only make me as vile as them, but—" He paused. "I'm curious about this, Stephen. A man so concerned with his public image who does this in private makes me doubt other aspects of him." "You're thinking of investigating him?" Ray raised an eyebrow. "Not for revenge, but out of professional instinct," Adrian explained. "If he's this morally flexible, who knows if he's the same in business?" In the following weeks, Adrian began to collect public information about Stephen and his company. As a detective, he had extensive experience in investigation and a wide network of contacts that allowed him to access information through legal channels. He discovered that Stephen's company had an ambiguous history regarding environmental protection. Although it outwardly promoted green ideals, in its actual operations, it took advantage of regulatory loopholes to cut environmental costs. Similar situations occurred in labor rights. They offered seemingly good working conditions, but in reality, they evaded responsibilities through outsourcing and contractual loopholes. What caught Adrian's attention the most was that certain projects sponsored by Stephen through the Foundation seemed to primarily serve his public relations needs rather than truly helping the beneficiaries. None of this constituted clear legal violations, but existed in the gray areas between legality and morality. Meanwhile, Lucy found herself in an awkward situation. Although she had superficially ended her personal relationship with Stephen, he continued to maintain close contact, creating opportunities to be alone with her using various work pretexts. What worried her most was that rumors about her divorce began to circulate at the Foundation, and some colleagues became noticeably distant. In a project evaluation meeting, she noticed that board members questioned her proposals more than before, especially those related to projects funded by Stephen. This made her realize that her professional reputation might already be affected. "Lucy, we need to discuss budgetary issues for the Youth Center project." After the meeting, the Foundation's president, Catherine, called her to her office. Catherine was an elegant lady in her 60s with an excellent reputation in the charity world. She had always supported Lucy's work, but today her expression was exceptionally serious. "Of course. Is there a problem?" Lucy tried to maintain a professional attitude. "No. The audit department has found that the administrative costs of this project are 30% higher than expected, while the proportion of funds actually benefiting the youth is below our standards, Catherine said directly. What's most concerning is that several consulting firms hired for this project seem to be linked to Mr. Stephen. Lucy felt a wave of dizziness. These consulting firms were indeed recommended by Stephen, but she never thought to verify their relationship with him. She trusted him too much, or rather, she was so absorbed in his attention that she neglected her professional judgment. I didn't know these companies were linked to Stephen, Lucy replied honestly. Catherine looked at her deeply. I believe you, Lucy, but it's still serious negligence. As a project director, you have a responsibility to ensure that funds are used in the most effective way. Lucy nodded, feeling ashamed. She had not only betrayed her husband, but had also compromised her professional integrity due to a personal relationship. Meanwhile, Adrian's investigation continued. Through a former colleague who worked at an environmental agency, he obtained details about the environmental violations of Stephen's company. Through another friend in the labor department, he learned that the company had faced numerous employee complaints, but all had been resolved through legal means and private settlements to avoid public scrutiny. Although this information was not enough to constitute a criminal case, it was enough for Adrian to confirm that there was a huge disparity between Stephen's public image and his actual behavior. As a detective on the verge of retirement, Adrian knew the power of the truth well. He decided to bring this information to light in a legal and effective way, not for revenge, but for justice and integrity. 3 months after starting the divorce proceedings, the court finally approved their agreement. Adrian and Lucy met for the last time at the lawyer's office to sign the final documents. It was the first time they had been truly alone in months. After signing, Lucy couldn't help but speak up. Adrian, I know this might not mean anything, but I'm truly sorry. Adrian looked at her in silence, no longer anger in his eyes, just a quiet acceptance. I know, but some things, an apology can't change. Do you hate me? Lucy asked softly, with a vulnerability in her voice that Adrian had rarely seen. Adrian didn't think for a moment, then shook his head. No, I don't hate you. I just don't trust you anymore. Without trust, love is meaningless. Lucy lowered her head. I understand, but I want you to know that I have no regrets about our marriage, except for the way it ended. Adrian stood up, preparing to leave. Take care, Lucy. These were their last words as husband and wife. As he walked out of the lawyer's office, Adrian took a deep breath. Although the sadness lingered, he felt a strange liberation. He had made his decision, not just about his marriage, but also about what he would do next. It was time for the truth to come out. 6 months after the divorce, the Pacific Northwest Charitable Foundation entered its annual audit season. Lucy was still the project director, responsible for coordinating the audit preparation work among departments. On the surface, everything seemed normal, but the internal atmosphere had subtly changed. Stephen's attitude toward her had become complex. In private, he still tried to resume their intimate relationship, but in public, especially in board meetings, he often sharply questioned her proposals. Lucy gradually realized that Stephen had never truly respected her professional skills. His praise and support were just to maintain their personal relationship. Within the foundation, rumors about the reasons for her divorce began to circulate. Some colleagues kept their distance, while others showed excessive sympathy, both attitudes equally uncomfortable. But what was most painful for Lucy was discovering that she had thought Stephen truly appreciated her skills, only to realize now that it might have been just another of his manipulative tactics. Under this pressure, Lucy received an email from Eleanor, a well-known local investigative journalist, asking about the efficiency of charitable fund use. This type of inquiry was not unusual. Transparency was part of the foundation's job. But Eleanor's questions were exceptionally specific, pointing directly at projects Lucy managed in collaboration with Stephen's company. We have received information suggesting that these projects have significant efficiency issues in fund use, Eleanor wrote. According to data analysis, the administrative costs of these projects are 30% higher than similar projects, while the proportion of funds actually benefiting the recipients is below the industry average. We would like to hear your explanation. Lucy felt a sense of panic. She had indeed given more weight to Stephen's suggestions in these projects, including hiring the contractors and consultants he recommended. but at the time, she considered it a necessary step to maintain relations with a major donor, not realizing the potential efficiency problems. She immediately contacted Stephen, but his response was distant and cold. "It's just a routine investigation. Just handle it," Stephen said over the phone, his tone nonchalant. "Emphasize the social impact of our projects, downplay the cost details. Journalists lack specialized financial knowledge. Show them touching stories of beneficiaries and they'll forget the numbers." Lucy hung up the phone, feeling uneasy. Stephen's advice wasn't completely unreasonable. Public relations strategies often operate this way. But in the current situation, this evasive attitude seemed to confirm the existence of problems. "I think we should respond to these questions with more transparency, Stephen. If there are really efficiency problems, we need to acknowledge them and improve," Lucy insisted in a subsequent call. Stephen's tone turned cold. "Don't be naive, Lucy. Both business and charity are about image. Do you think donors care about every penny, or how many times their names appear in reports and acknowledgments?" These words made Lucy see Stephen's true nature completely. To him, charity was just a tool to enhance his personal and corporate image, not to genuinely help those in need. At the same time, another investigative journalist, James, contacted Stephen himself, but asking about his company's environmental record. "We understand that your company often promotes a green image through charitable activities, but in its actual production processes, it has repeatedly taken advantage of regulatory loopholes, causing unnecessary environmental burdens. Doesn't this constitute a form of greenwashing?" Stephen dismissed these accusations, considering them slander from competitors. However, when a third journalist asked about the company's labor policies, especially the working conditions in subcontracted factories, he began to feel that something was wrong. These investigations seemed to come from different media outlets with no obvious connection, but they all pointed to the contradictions between Stephen's corporate image and his actual behavior. What troubled Stephen the most was that the information these journalists had was exceptionally accurate, hitting the nail on the head. "Investigate the background of these journalists. Find out who is providing information," Stephen ordered his company's PR director. "I suspect a competitor is causing trouble." But the investigation's results confused him even more. These journalists came from different media outlets with diverse professional backgrounds, and apparently did not share a common source of information. The only commonality was that they all possessed internal information that would normally be difficult to obtain. Meanwhile, Adrian was leading a quiet, retired life on the other side of the small town. He fished, read, and occasionally met with old friends. On the surface, he seemed to have left the past behind and started a new life. But privately, he was executing a carefully designed plan. As a detective, he mastered the skills of collecting and analyzing information and had established an extensive network of contacts. Over the past few months, he had used these resources to collect, through legal channels, abundant public material on Stephen's business practices. He examined financial reports, environmental assessment documents, labor complaints, and court records, gradually piecing together a portrait of the business practices Stephen carefully concealed. At the same time, he also studied the charitable projects managed by Lucy, discovering real problems in resource allocation. These were not obvious crimes, but existed in the gray area between legality and morality. Adrian did not provide this information directly to the media. Instead, through a trusted network built over years, he passed different clues to appropriate investigative journalists, ensuring that the source could not be traced back to him. He provided no false information or direct accusations, only facts and data, letting the journalists draw their own conclusions. "Are you sure about doing this?" Ray asked one evening as they were grilling steaks in the backyard of Adrian's cabin. "I'm not doing anything illegal or immoral," Adrian replied calmly. "I'm just making existing information easier to discover. If Stephen has nothing to hide, these investigations won't affect him." Ray nodded, understanding his friend's thinking. Adrian had never been one to seek revenge, but he had an almost obsessive determination for justice and truth. For him, this was not about personal revenge, but about making everyone accountable for their actions. This strategy began to yield results. More and more media outlets paid attention to the contradictions between Stephen's business practices and his charitable image, and they also began to question the effectiveness of certain foundation projects. The foundation's board of directors soon noticed these negative reports. Although Stephen, as a major donor, had considerable influence, the foundation's reputation was paramount. President Catherine called an emergency meeting, demanding an internal audit of the involved projects. "We must maintain transparency with the public and donors," Catherine emphasized at the meeting. "If efficiency problems really exist, we need to correct them immediately and explain to the public." Lucy sat in a corner of the meeting room, feeling like she was in the center of a storm. She knew the impending audit would reveal all the compromises she had made in project management under Stephen's influence. This not only affected her professional reputation, but also her personal integrity. After the meeting, Stephen pulled Lucy aside. "Listen, stay calm. Don't panic. We need to organize the documents before the audit. Make sure everything looks compliant." "What do you mean?" Lucy asked, frowning. "Don't play dumb, Lucy," Stephen lowered his voice. "We both know the real situation of those projects. Now we need to make some adjustments to make the numbers look better." Lucy looked at him in shock. "Are you suggesting I falsify documents?" "Don't use such ugly words," Stephen said, frowning. "We're just ensuring the information is presented in the most favorable way. It's common sense in business." In that moment, Lucy saw Stephen's true nature completely. He had never really cared about charity or the beneficiaries, not even her. She was just another tool to maintain his public image and satisfy his personal desires. What was most shocking to her was that she had been attracted to this man, even giving up 30 years of marriage for him. This realization made her feel sick. "No, Stephen," Lucy said firmly. "I will cooperate with the audit, providing all the true information. If I made mistakes, I will take responsibility." Stephen's expression darkened. "Are you sure you want to do this? Think about the consequences." This threat awakened the last bit of self-respect in Lucy. "I've already lost my husband and my self-respect over bad decisions." Lucy looked directly into Stephen's eyes. "I won't lose my integrity for you too." Stephen let out a cold laugh and left. Lucy knew she had just possibly lost her last ally, but she felt a long-awaited relief. Whatever happened next, at least she could face herself honestly. That night, Lucy sat at home, reflecting on her choices over the past year. What had charmed her about Stephen? His charisma and power, or her internal longing for recognition and novelty? Whatever the reason, the price had been too high. She lost Adrian, a husband who truly loved and respected her, damaged her professional reputation, and almost lost her basic integrity. She picked up her phone, wanting to send a message to Adrian to tell him she finally saw the truth. But after typing a few words, she deleted them. Adrian had made it clear he would not forgive her, and she had no right to disturb his new life, even if only to ease her own guilt. Lucy decided that from now on she would focus on rebuilding her professional integrity and dignity without expecting forgiveness or understanding from anyone. These were consequences she had to face alone. The results of the internal audit were more serious than anyone had anticipated. The report showed that several projects managed by Lucy indeed had significant efficiency problems, most related to service providers recommended by Stephen. These contractors charged far more than the market average, but the quality of service they offered was mediocre. More worryingly, there was evidence that several of these companies had covert partnerships with Stephen's company, which could constitute a conflict of interest. The board of directors called a special meeting to discuss the report's findings. Before the discussion began, Lucy stood up. "Before we begin, I would like to say a few words," Lucy said, her voice calm but firm. "I take full responsibility for these problems. As a project director, I should have more carefully vetted these service providers and cost structures. I allowed a personal relationship to influence my professional judgment, betraying the trust of the foundation and the beneficiaries." Catherine's expression was complex. She appreciated Lucy's honesty, but the severity of the problems could not be ignored. "Lucy, you have worked at the foundation for 15 years, always with excellent performance, but these problems are indeed serious. The board needs to take action to protect the foundation's reputation." Stephen also attended the meeting. He planned to use his influence to minimize these problems, but Lucy's public confession took him by surprise. Even worse, the audit report clearly pointed out the connection between the service providers he recommended and his own company, which directly damaged his reputation at the foundation. I think we should comprehensively examine these projects, instead of simply blaming individual mistakes. Stephen tried to shift the focus. The foundation's oversight mechanisms also need improvement. But other board members were not convinced. More and more people began to question Stephen's ethical standards and whether he was using the foundation to serve his own business interests. The final decision was Lucy would be removed from the position of project director and reassigned as a consultant with a significant reduction in salary and authority. Meanwhile, the foundation would reorganize the problematic projects and maintain an appropriate distance from Stephen. For Lucy, this was a major blow to her career, but she accepted the sanction, committing to cooperate with the reorganization work. As she left the meeting room, she felt more relief than depression. At least she had chosen honesty without compromising her principles again. Stephen's situation was more complicated. The media investigations into his company continued to deepen, covering everything from greenwashing to labor rights issues. Although most of the accusations were in a legal gray area, insufficient to constitute criminal cases, they were enough to damage the company's reputation and Stephen's carefully cultivated social image. A local TV station aired an in-depth report contrasting Stephen's public statements on the environment with his company's actual environmental record. The report cited testimonies from former employees and environmental experts, even finding several residents affected by the company's environmental practices. The journalist's conclusion was direct. This is not corporate social responsibility, but a carefully designed greenwashing strategy. On social media, the topic spread quickly. Overnight, Stephen went from being a respected entrepreneur and philanthropist to a typical case of greenwashing. Business partners began to distance themselves, and several major clients suspended negotiations. Stephen called an emergency meeting with company executives, trying to develop a crisis management strategy. "Someone is manipulating the media to attack us," he declared furiously. "Find out who is leaking this information." But the internal investigation yielded no results. There was no obvious source of information leakage. These journalists seem to have simply conducted very thorough investigations, collecting already existing but scattered information to form a complete picture. Stephen tried to regain ground through public relations crisis management, issuing statements promising to improve the company's environmental measures and increase charitable donations. But these efforts had little effect and were even criticized as another image operation. The public and the media had seen through this type of superficial gesture, demanding substantial changes and sincere reflection. What surprised Stephen most was that when he contacted Lucy seeking public support from the foundation, he was refused. "I'm sorry, Stephen, but the foundation must remain neutral," Lucy said calmly over the phone. "We cannot get involved in this controversy." "Neutrality?" Stephen asked in disbelief. "This is your attitude after I've donated millions to the foundation?" "A donation is not a transaction, Stephen," Lucy replied, her voice calm but firm. "It cannot be exchanged for the foundation's endorsement of the donor's actions. If you truly care about charity, you should understand this." "Don't pretend to be noble, Lucy." Stephen's voice turned sharp. "A few months ago you were still moaning in my arms, and now you're acting like a decent person." Lucy felt sick, but she remained calm. "It's precisely because I have made mistakes that I cannot continue to make them. Goodbye, Stephen." After hanging up, Stephen threw his phone against the desk. He felt the situation slipping out of his control. The image he had carefully built for years was crumbling, and he couldn't find a clear enemy to fight against. Meanwhile, Adrian continued his quiet, retired life. He had moved to a lakeside cabin, fishing, gardening, and occasionally meeting with old friends. He followed the news about Stephen and the foundation, but never made any public comments. "Looks like your ex-wife's lover is in big trouble," Ray commented one day during their regular fishing trip. Adrian just nodded slightly. "Everyone must answer for their own actions." "You have to admit, karma came fast and hard," Ray laughed, almost as if someone was pulling the strings behind the scenes. Adrian didn't respond, concentrating on his fishing rod, but Ray knew his old friend well. He knew he wouldn't be interested in these matters without a reason. "It was you, wasn't it?" Ray asked directly. Adrian was silent for a moment, then replied softly, "I just passed existing information to the right people. The truth has its own power." Ray nodded, asking no more questions. He understood Adrian's method. It wasn't simple revenge, but a special form of justice. Adrian had not slandered anyone, had not fabricated evidence. He just made sure the truth was not hidden. For a detective dedicated his entire life to discovering the truth, this was the most appropriate response he could imagine. One morning while fishing, Adrian received a message from Lucy. "Thank you for not publicly accusing me. I know that everything happening has to do with you, and I deserve it." Adrian looked at the message, reflecting for a long time. He knew Lucy had misunderstood his actions. His goal was never to take revenge on her, but to expose the hypocrisy of Stephen and his exploitation of Charity. Although Lucy had betrayed him, in a way, she was also a victim of Stephen's manipulation and use. Finally, Adrian replied, "I just let the truth surface. Everyone must answer for their own choices, including me." Lucy received the reply while organizing her office. As a project consultant, she now had a small office, far from the center of decision-making. In the past few months, she had lost a lot: marriage, position, social circle, self-esteem. But strangely, she felt an unprecedented peace. Without Stephen's influence, without the pressure of pursuing power and recognition, she began to re-examine her life choices. Perhaps this professional setback was a necessary adjustment, giving her a chance to redefine her values and goals. Meanwhile, Stephen's situation continued to deteriorate. The media investigations expanded to other business activities. Regulatory authorities began to examine alleged environmental violations, and environmental organizations organized protests in front of his company. Although he did not face criminal charges, Stephen's business empire suffered a heavy blow. Shareholders questioned his leadership, and the board of directors began discussing possible changes in management. For someone who considered public image his main asset, this reputational damage was almost fatal. The most ironic thing was that the foundation's board of directors decided to return Stephen's donations from the past year to avoid association with a controversial figure. This decision was a public humiliation for Stephen. When Adrian learned of this decision through the news, he felt a complex satisfaction. It was not revenge, but the natural realization of justice. Everyone finally faces the consequences of their actions. He had not taken any illegal or immoral measures. He had only made the truth public, letting the public and relevant institutions make their own judgments. When autumn arrived, the leaves on the city's trees began to change color. Adrian was drinking coffee on the porch of his lakeside cabin, admiring the changes in nature. The phone rang. It was Ray inviting him to go fishing over the weekend. "Have you seen the news recently?" Ray asked over the phone. "Stephen's company's stock price has plummeted. The board has already decided to replace him. He's been demoted to an honorary advisor, basically lost all decision-making power." "I heard something," Adrian replied calmly. "How do you feel?" Ray asked tentatively. Adrian thought for a moment. "Peaceful. Not because of his punishment, but because the truth has prevailed." "Are you going to contact Lucy?" Ray asked again. "I heard she's not having a good time either." "No," Adrian's response was firm and calm. "Some relationships once broken cannot be rebuilt. She made her own decisions. Now she must face the consequences, just like Stephen, just like all of us." After hanging up, Adrian continued to look at the lake. The pain of the past lingered, but it no longer dominated his life. He chose not to forgive the betrayal, but he also chose not to be bound by resentment. This was the best gift he could give himself, after the pain, to regain freedom and peace. A month later, Lucy found herself rebuilding her life. Although her position had been demoted, she discovered that she actually enjoyed the consultant work more. It allowed her to interact directly with the beneficiaries, to see the real impact of the work, instead of being caught in endless administrative and political disputes. On weekends, she started attending therapy, directly confronting her choices and internal motivations. This process was painful but necessary, helping her understand what led her to abandon true love for an illusory recognition. Sometimes she thought of Adrian, not with romantic longing, but with respect for his character. After all this, he chose a way to respond to the betrayal that maintained his dignity without falling into pure revenge. This taught her a valuable lesson about integrity and self-respect. Stephen's company was finally reorganized and he was demoted to an honorary director, his real powers significantly reduced. He tried to rebuild his social image, but public memory is long, and trust once lost is hard to regain. He tried to contact Lucy several times, but she firmly refused to meet in private, maintaining only basic professional courtesy on necessary work occasions. Stephen gradually realized that she was no longer the woman who could be dazzled by his charm and position. The paths of the three had changed forever. There are no perfect endings, only one's own choices and the consequences to face. But in this process, each of them obtained truths about themselves, some painful, some liberating, but all authentic. One winter morning, Adrian was adding new furniture to his cabin. Since his full retirement, he had more time to develop hobbies. Recently, he had taken up woodworking. Making simple furniture gave him satisfaction. Concentrating on manual labor allowed him to temporarily forget past pains. The doorbell rang, a rare occurrence on normal days. His cabin was by the lake, quite far from the nearest neighbor. Adrian opened the door and found the mailman delivering a small package. No sender's name, only the postmark showed it came from the city. Adrian carefully opened the package, finding an elegantly bound photo book with natural landscapes of the Pacific Northwest printed on the cover. Opening the first page revealed a note. "Thank you for teaching me to honestly face my own reality. I wish you happiness." No signature, but Adrian recognized Lucy's handwriting. The book contained natural landscapes they had visited together. Adrian remembered that in the early years of their marriage, they often went hiking together, one of their happiest times. Adrian set the book aside and continued his woodworking. He would not contact Lucy, would not try to rebuild the already broken trust, but he would not let hatred and anger dominate the rest of his life either. In the following years, the lives of the three followed their own paths. Adrian fully enjoyed retirement, meeting with old friends, developing new hobbies, and occasionally accepting consulting jobs for the local police. He did not seek a new partner, but did not actively avoid relationships either. His life was full and peaceful, the best anyone who had experienced betrayal could hope for. Lucy continued to work at the foundation, no longer in high-level positions, but she found a new passion in direct service. She no longer pursued power and recognition, but focused on how to truly help those in need. Having lost her marriage and position, she rediscovered her original purpose. Stephen's business empire, after the reorganization, did not collapse, but his personal influence diminished considerably. He tried to rebuild his public image, but was always under the shadow of past controversies. For someone accustomed to controlling everything, this marginalization was the most severe punishment. Each paid the price for their choices, also learning valuable lessons. No one can escape the power of the truth, whether about oneself or others. Trust, once broken, is like a crack in a mirror. It can never be fully repaired. But amidst the fragments, perhaps a different kind of light can be reflected, reminding us to cherish every relationship based on mutual sincerity. Time flows. The seasons change. Adrian stood by the lake, looking at the sparkling water, remembering that night that changed his life. He did not regret his decision not to forgive the betrayal, but also not to be bound by hatred. He chose truth and justice, not revenge. He chose to let go, not to hold on. This allowed him to truly move on, with scars but also with dignity. This is life, without perfect endings, only authentic choices and consequences to bear. For Adrian, knowing the truth and upholding his principles was worth more than any false reconciliation. Perhaps this was the most important wisdom he gained from this experience. Some things are worth defending, even if the price is losing relationships we once valued. Thank you for listening to this emotionally intense story. We'd love to know, from what part of the world are you watching this video right now? What time is it there? Let